Initial discovery. I'd always been the adventurous type, the one who couldn't resist a good mystery. So when the rumors started swirling around campus about strange happenings in the forest behind the university, it didn't take much to convince me to check it out. The stories were all too similar: students hearing chanting, seeing eerie lights, and occasionally catching glimpses of robed figures disappearing into the trees. One crisp autumn evening, I convinced a few friends to join me. We were armed with nothing more than flashlights, a couple of smartphones, and a sense of excitement. The forest was thick and dark, the trees stretching up like gnarled fingers against the sky. It felt oddly quiet, almost as if the usual sounds of the night were being swallowed up by the darkness. We followed a narrow, winding path that led deeper into the forest. The air grew colder as we walked, and the only sounds were the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional rustle of something moving through the underbrush. I kept my flashlight beam steady, scanning the trees for any signs of the strange activities we had heard about. It wasn't long before we stumbled upon something odd. At first, it seemed like a few random objects scattered on the ground, some old candles, a few pieces of parchment with strange symbols drawn on them. But as we moved further, the signs became more elaborate. We found a circle drawn in what looked like white chalk, surrounded by more symbols that I couldn't decipher. It was unsettling, but also fascinating. "Guys, look at this," I whispered, shining my flashlight over a pile of what appeared to be remnants from a ritual. The air felt charged, heavy with an eerie stillness. We were standing in the middle of something that didn't quite make sense, and the excitement of discovery quickly turned into a sense of foreboding. As we examined the symbols and objects, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The forest seemed to close in around us, and every little sound felt amplified. I exchanged uneasy glances with my friends, who looked just as apprehensive as I felt. That's when we heard it, a low, rhythmic chanting coming from deeper in the woods. It was faint at first, but it grew louder and more insistent. My heart started to race as we exchanged nervous looks. There was something undeniably sinister about the chanting, and it was clear that whatever was happening here was far beyond a harmless prank. My curiosity got the better of me, and I motioned for my friends to follow me toward the source of the sound. We moved cautiously, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The trees seemed to part slightly, revealing a small clearing where the chanting was coming from. What we saw next would stay with me forever. Encounter with the cult. As we stepped into the clearing, my breath caught in my throat. The scene before us was something out of a nightmare. In the center of the clearing, a large, ornate circle was drawn in what looked like a dark, sticky substance. Candles flickered around the circle, casting eerie shadows that danced on the trees. Figures draped in dark robes were gathered around the circle, their hoods pulled low over their faces. The rhythmic chanting continued, a haunting melody that seemed to resonate through the very air. We stood frozen at the edge of the clearing, the cold night air pressing against us. I could see the flickering candlelight reflecting off the robes, creating an almost otherworldly glow. My friends whispered urgently, but I was too mesmerized by the sight before me to respond. One of the robed figures raised their arms, and the chanting grew louder and more intense. The figures were moving in a synchronized manner, their voices rising and falling in a pattern that was both hypnotic and terrifying. I could see strange symbols painted on the ground within the circle, their meanings completely lost on me. Suddenly, a figure stepped forward from the group, holding a dark, glistening object that looked like it could have been a ceremonial dagger. The figure raised it high, and the chanting reached a crescendo. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized that whatever was happening here was not just a ritual. It was something far more sinister. Panic set in as I grabbed my friends and tried to back away quietly, but it was too late. One of the robed figures turned abruptly, spotting us in the shadows. The chanting stopped abruptly, and a shiver of fear ran down my spine as the robed figures began to move toward us. Their faces were hidden, but their intentions were clear. "Run!" I hissed, pulling my friends by their arms. We sprinted back the way we came, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. The sound of footsteps and shouts followed us, growing closer and closer. The forest seemed to close in around us, branches scratching at our skin as we pushed through the underbrush. We finally broke through the tree line and stumbled back into the campus grounds, our adrenaline still pumping. We stopped to catch our breath, our faces pale and eyes wide with shock. The clearing was a good distance away, but the sense of danger lingered. We looked at each other, trying to make sense of what we had just witnessed. My friends were visibly shaken, but my own fear was compounded by an uneasy feeling that we were not out of danger yet. I could sense that something was following us, something that wasn't quite right. The forest had given us a glimpse into a world of darkness, and I knew that whatever we had seen was just the beginning. Consequences and escape. The days following that night were some of the most unsettling of my life. We tried to carry on as normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The forest clearing and the robed figures haunted my dreams, and every shadow seemed to hold a hidden threat. It began with small, unsettling occurrences. I started receiving anonymous text messages with cryptic warnings. "You've seen too much, and stay away from the forest." At first, I thought it was a prank from someone in my class, but then I began noticing more disturbing signs. My phone would buzz with new messages or calls, but when I answered, there was only static on the other end. I could have sworn I saw hooded figures lurking in the background of my campus photographs, just out of focus. One night, I came home to find my dorm room door slightly ajar. I was sure I had locked it before leaving. Inside, nothing seemed out of place, but a chilling sense of unease settled over me. I felt as if someone had been there, just moments before I arrived. I confided in my friends about the threats and the eerie feeling that I was being followed. They tried to reassure me, but even they could sense the growing tension. We decided to take our concerns to campus security, but they dismissed our fears, attributing them to stress and overactive imaginations. "There's nothing out there," they said. "Just rumors." One evening, as I was walking back from a late study session, I noticed a figure trailing me from a distance. It was too far away to make out clearly, but the sight of someone in a dark hoodie made my heart race. I quickened my pace, glancing back repeatedly, but the figure seemed to always be just out of reach. I finally reached my dorm, slamming the door shut behind me and locking it with trembling hands. The next day, things escalated. I found a note slipped under my door. It was written in a hurried scrawl. "We warned you. Leave or face the consequences." I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. The messages, the figure trailing me, it was all connected to that night in the forest. My friends and I decided it was time to get out of town. We packed up what we could and made plans to leave for a nearby city where we had relatives. But the night before our departure, things took a turn for the worse. As we were loading the car, we saw several hooded figures standing at the edge of the campus, watching us silently. Their presence was unmistakable, and the message was clear. They knew we were leaving. We hurriedly finished packing and drove away under the cover of darkness. The entire journey was a blur of fear and tension. Every car that passed us on the highway, every unexpected noise made us jump. The feeling of being followed didn't leave us until we reached our destination. Even now, as I sit in the safety of a new city, the shadows of that night linger. I still occasionally receive strange messages and see shadows that remind me of the figures from the forest. The experience left a scar on my life, a reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the edges of our understanding. Start of the investigation. Introduction to the journalist. Jessica Carter is an acclaimed investigative journalist renowned for her fearless approach and groundbreaking revelations. Known for diving deep into controversial topics, she has earned both accolades and enemies. Her latest challenge begins when she receives a cryptic anonymous tip hinting at a hidden sect operating covertly within the city. The anonymous tip. The tip is a brief, mysterious message. They are closer than you think. Look where the shadows fall. Intrigued and alarmed, Jessica starts her investigation by gathering any information she can about the alleged sect. Initial research. Jessica dives into background research, poring over old records, local news archives, and any relevant documentation. Her initial findings are scant, but she discovers mentions of strange gatherings and disappearances linked to an underground organization. Interviews with former members. She reaches out to former members and individuals who have had contact with the sect. Some are reluctant to speak, but a few provide cryptic and unsettling details, hinting at dark rituals and inexplicable events. Jessica senses she's on the brink of uncovering something significant. Threats and pursuits. Suspicion of being followed. As Jessica delves deeper, she starts to notice unsettling signs that she's being watched. She sees unfamiliar cars parked near her home and feels a growing sense of paranoia. Her sources begin disappearing or become unresponsive, increasing her sense of dread. Receiving threats. The threats become more direct. Anonymous phone calls with distorted voices and eerie, handwritten notes left at her door. The messages are vague but menacing, warning her to cease her investigation or face dire consequences. Confrontation with sect members. During one evening, Jessica encounters a group of menacing individuals who confront her in a dark alley. They claim to be enforcers of the sect, giving her a stark warning to abandon her investigation or suffer the repercussions. Their intimidation is palpable, but Jessica's resolve only strengthens. The fight for survival, protecting herself and her family. Despite the escalating danger, Jessica remains determined to uncover the truth. She takes steps to protect herself and her family, including installing security systems and altering her daily routines. The sense of danger becomes a constant presence in her life. Intense chases and kidnapping attempts. The stakes heighten as Jessica experiences increasingly intense chases and several attempted kidnappings. Each escape is a narrow one, and her vigilance is pushed to its limits. The threats are no longer abstract but manifesting in tangible, life-threatening situations. Climax, exposure and witness protection. In a dramatic climax, Jessica manages to compile a damning report exposing the sect's activities. Her courageous exposé captures widespread media attention and public outrage. However, the victory comes at a high cost. To ensure her safety, Jessica and her family are placed in a witness protection program. Her life, as she knew it, is irrevocably altered, but she has succeeded in bringing a hidden menace into the light.